Hi, everybody. My name's Evan.
And I'm Scott.
We're both Baptist pastors, and this is our podcast about the Bible. But we're not here to save your souls. We won't be telling you what to believe or how to behave, and we promise never to invite you to church. We just like to talk about the Bible, what it actually says, where it probably came from, and how it's been understood or not by different people in different times and places. This is your warning, though, especially if you are or have been a person of faith. For our purposes, the Bible is not a sacred text. During this podcast, we'll be treating the Bible more or less like any other book. While you're here, there's nothing you have to believe, there are no beliefs you can't question, and there are no questions you can't ask.
And today we're going to be looking at Romans chapter 16. We've been looking at some passages that document name changes in the Bible. But this one is not name changes. We have a list of names in Romans 16, a long list of names. And today we want to look at why would Paul collect such a list? And is there anything significant to learn from this list of interesting people?
We've been off for a couple weeks, a few more weeks than we expected, but we are excited to be back and excited that you chose to join us. Welcome to the Unholy Bible Study Podcast.
Well, the very first time you mentioned Romans 16, I actually did wonder why you picked it because I know the chapter really well because
Yeah.
I preached a Thanksgiving sermon on it one time.
Uh-huh. I can see that working.
Uh-huh. And the title of the sermon was Thank You God for Rutabaga, and it was based on a World War II story about a woman who only had rutabaga to survive on, and then every Thanksgiving after that, she made rutabaga as a memory of how God provided for her and her family through.
It's also just a delicious side dish.
Right. I'd only used that text that one time for that one sermon. I don't think I'd ever used it for it, except I probably taught Romans and looked at it. But when you picked it, I'm like, why? Because the name changes made sense.
Yeah.
But there aren't name changes here. But then when I started looking at it, and when I realized, well, some of these folks are Jewish Christians and some of them are Greek or Gentile Christians, and then I'd never done a deep dive really.
Uh-huh.
And then I see, there's a lot going on here theologically in this list of names.
I think you could make an argument that this is the most interesting chapter in the book of Romans. Wouldn't expect a lot of people to go with me there, but I think for me, it might be the most interesting chapter in the book of Romans.
I think so. Actually, I had this thought when we were going to record it before, but it came to me again driving up here. If you take this seriously, that he is greeting these people, identifying these people.
He wants you to lean back.
Oh,
stay back.
Or I mean, you're fine now, but
I don't
just don't lean forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had a thought.
Yeah,
coming up.
You cannot interpret Romans in the traditional evangelical. It's about salvation, individual salvation. The Romans wrote all that kind of stuff. If you take this seriously, because this confirms Paul's passion for keeping Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians and Judaism and this new movement together. He saw it as one thing.
Yeah. I think it contextualizes excuse me. I think it contextualizes the whole book
Mm-hmm.
in a way that that illuminates like why does this matter to Paul?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a window into the first century church in a way that we just don't see very often in the New Testament. Like that wasn't Paul didn't write this, or this wasn't written like to give us a window into like that's not what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
But indirectly it kind of shows us like what this community was like and who was part of it and how they related to each other, and talked about each other and thought about each other. And it feels more authentic to me. Like I trust it more than some of the more direct descriptions of the early church that we have both in the New Testament and outside of it, because it's like that wasn't Paul's point. So it's not guarded, it's not biased, or it's less guarded and biased than some of those other writings might be.
Well, Paul wasn't guarded at all. I mean,
He often seemed to say what he wants, but this is also a very like politically astute. Like it's not careless. Like he's
no,
writing
he
it
chose.
this way.
Yeah. I mean, he names a woman apostle. It's clear he cares. I mean, think of, a foremost noteworthy, significant female apostle. That's highly charged. In that, I mean, that's like
I think it must have been charged even then. It's certainly charged in some churches today.
so much so that the history of the church has been trying to turn Junia into a man.
Yeah. A lot of preachers still do that.
Right. But if you look at like this list, and then you compare this list to what he says in Galatians, in Christ, there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female.
Uh-huh.
Who do you have
He
in the
seems
list?
to really believe it.
Yeah, that's his list.
Yeah.
His list has all those people here. He has women, he has Jews, he has Gentiles, he has slaves, former slaves, free people. He's got every kind of person in his list.
Yeah. So we've been doing this mini series on biblical names, and a lot of the passages we've looked at are significant name changes, or like when a person was given either a new name or their original name and what it meant and why it was significant within like the literary biblical context. But this chapter occurred to me as a good example of another almost biblical genre, because there are points in the Bible where we have not name changes, but we just have long lists of names. And I was thinking of like the begat chapters from the book of Genesis, which are just like a list of generations. And then I was thinking of the genealogies from two of the Gospels, which are like a list of Jesus' ancestors. Like these were the generations that culminated in the birth of Jesus. But then I thought of this passage as well, which I think in some ways is maybe the most interesting to talk about of those lists of names, because it's a list of names from the early church, and we just don't have much in the way of that. So it's evocative of this whole like new community and world that had sprung into existence in the first century. So that's why I picked it. That's what's interesting to me about it. Is that
So let me ask you further then. Did you see this as a strategic list, that Paul was addressing these people by names for a strategic purpose in
not
his
when
mission?
I picked it?
Okay.
I had never done I'd never looked at the commentaries on this list. Like I'd been aware of it. I always known, like I'd certainly heard scholars talk about the presence of women in this list. And you mentioned Junia, who is a female apostle. And in kind of the church context I came out of, that was a surprising thing to hear, or it even raised all these questions about, okay, what does the word apostle even mean? What did it mean for Paul? What does it mean now? And how are those things different? So I'd heard some scholarship, or heard some scholars talk about this. I'd heard some preachers preach on this text, but not very often. So I was a little bit surprised to find some of the. Well, there's not a ton of scholarship on this passage.
No, there's not. I was disappointed. Even I had these hunches or things that I thought I might get helpful info on, and I really didn't find what I was looking for. I had this question. So, in terms of from a scholarly opinion, do you think Ephesians is an authentic Paul letter?
I don't think of it as one of Paul's letters.
This brought Ephesians up in my mind because you remember where he says
the mystery unveiled.
No, the through the cross, I don't know if it's Christ or God has destroyed the wall of hostility between Jews and Gentiles.
Yeah, sure.
So for that's so Pauline to me.
Yeah.
Like this division of the wall between Jew and Gentile.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I think of Ephesians as somebody later, a student of Paul's or a student of Paul's theology and thought, riffing on the ideas and expanding on the ideas that emerge in Romans, and even some of the language that's included here in the last chapter.
Yeah. So to me, it wasn't that I shifted my opinion on who wrote Ephesians. I think it probably, as you do, probably a second generation Paul student. But
it's good Pauline theology.
It's the way Paul thinks. Yeah.
I think that's...
And it's this, this theme that shows up in Paul is this, I think this, he sees maybe almost imminent, this schism that between...
You think he was afraid it was going to happen or expected it to happen?
Yeah, and look how mad he gets at Peter.
Yeah.
He says, Peter, you're betraying the gospel. What did Peter betray? What did he do that betrayed the gospel?
The unity of this.
Right. He stopped eating with Gentiles. And this is such a different vision of what the church is in my mind. If you think what God is doing is expanding the circle, not creating a new circle or a new group or a group that has it all right because the Jews had it all wrong. That's not how Paul thought. God began something with the Jews. God began something with Abraham, and Abraham's the anchor point for Paul, I think, theologically, that is supposed to just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and embrace the entirety of humanity. That's what this list, I think, is about. This list is a portrait of known humanity in a way.
Yeah.
And
just because of all the different groups represented and so much, I mean, there's so much here we can't know. It's evocative. It's it's suggestive, but there's also, I assume that's why a lot of the commentaries, they don't really gloss over this, but they don't have a lot to say about this chapter, probably because anything they could say would be wild and rampant speculation. But which is what podcasts are for.
It does make you wonder, like, so what was, Rome like in AD 50, 60? Really, what was the culture like? Where would you have encountered these people on the streets? Would they have known each other outside of this
I'm so curious about this too.
Was Rome so cosmopolitan that you did have this constant rubbing of elbows with all kinds of different people like you would in a New York City or Chicago? You walk down the street, you see every kind of human being there is, right?
Yeah.
From a homeless person sitting on a milk crate with their cup, and then your bigwig, Fortune 500 person walking in their $3,000 suit to every color and nationality.
And I do think So this is one of the questions this chapter raises for me, and we can talk more about it maybe after the break. But with one thing that's not clear, like we can see from these names that there are men and women, there are Jews and Gentiles, like there are Hebrew names and Greek names. There are some names that are suggestive about social ties, but there's nothing here explicitly or that is clearly about class or wealth. Like,
Well, but if you know somebody who's a relative of Herod,
so there's some
and if you know
there's
people
some
that are
suggestion that there are powerful people
That-
on
right.
this list.
there are
One of the things I'm curious about is are some of these people poor?
Well,
I'd
if
like to believe
some
that
of
they
these are slave names, and I wouldn't think they would be.
Oh, are they really?
Yeah. Yeah. I could tell you some of the slave names if I look here. I mean, Urbanus is a slave name, just
Okay.
flat out.
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about is like, and I think this is the question you were asking is, did these people interact socially within the church? Like, is Paul bringing to their attention the diversity of their community? Like, was there a country club house church in Rome and a slave church in Rome? Or was it, like you said, a cosmopolitan place where you were actually rubbing elbows? Like, was the church on the streets of Rome? You might be rubbing elbows literally with someone of a very different class than you, but that doesn't mean you're friends. It doesn't mean you're equal. And I'm so curious, like, was this network of church? There was no Roman church, as
Right.
far as we know. Like, we're talking about networks of house churches that may or may not have related to each other. And I'm so curious about how they related.
Yeah, the one thing that I did read, and I don't remember which commentary I saw this in, but they were connecting different names to different house churches in Rome.
Yeah.
And then that made me think, so there may have been some cultural divisions, that this house
Yeah.
church,
Was there a Greek and a Jewish house
house
church? Yeah.
You know, they're both followers of Jesus, but they aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, look
Like, I can't imagine that there weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and again, it's just wild speculation, but like, that's how it was, right?
Well, I mean, I walk into this building. There's a Korean church that
Yeah.
meets here, right?
Yeah.
There's a Hispanic church that is there? No.
There has been.
Has
there isn't
been,
now. Yeah.
there's been
but there are
a
African
Korean church met here at one
diaspora churches.
time. But how much rubbing of elbows do we do with each other? Really, I've
Yeah.
never met any of the Korean folks who go here. I've seen them.
Yeah. Like,
but-
it's just, it would take time and energy to invest in those relationships.
So the natural human instinct is to just remain in the comfortableness of your social sphere. And if Paul is saying, hey, do you all realize,
yeah. Who's down the street?
right,
or
and that
on
you
the
all
other
are
side of
following
town?
Jesus, and don't you realize that there's a reason that all of us from all these different perspectives and cultural backgrounds, political, that actually we're all about one thing?
Yeah. And I can't tell how strategic, like, again, there is no way to know, but this feels like Paul introducing his friends to each other. Like,
I think-
saying, like, these are all people I know, respect, maybe people he, like, here again, there's just so much we cannot know, but it's like Paul's telling people he loves about other people he loves, and the warmth feels like it feels very warm and caring and enthusiastic in a way the rest of the book of Romans really does. I mean, there are enthusiastic passages in Romans, but I wouldn't call it an especially warm book or a personal book until this.
And the weird thing about Paul, I think if you read the entirety of the letter,
Do you suggest that?
What?
Reading the entirety of the letter? I mean, theoretically, yes, reading Romans is a good thing to do, especially
Well,
if you're
so
going to
you
talk about
so
it.
so
But have you, like, I assume at some point you have sat down and read the whole thing
oh yeah.
from beginning to
So
end?
I took a class in
Yeah.
Romans, and you want to know the first thing I did on my own initiative
Just read
was
it?
I typed the whole letter out.
Oh, that takes a while.
I typed it all out so I
Was
could.
that like on a typewriter?
Yeah. I typed the entire thing out so I could slow myself down.
Like get a sense of what it's like
Yeah.
to
And-
read this as a letter, to write this as a letter.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember, I remember that. And then,
I can hear it clacking.
and then I remember I had wide margins. So I used what I had typed out in class. That's what I took as my text for the
Yeah.
Romans. And
That's a good idea. Did you just think of that, or did somebody suggest
no, I
it?
just was.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
Scott
idea.
Smith weird thing to do, you know.
It is a weird thing to do, but it's a good idea.
But I remember.
But it's
how-
such. I asked the question because it's a long letter. It's Paul's longest letter. It's a dense letter. Like scholars spend their lives tracking, like rhetorically, literarily, what is Paul doing here? Like, how do you make sense out of this?
Well, what it
of
did for me
serpentine
was I
argument.
saw Romans as a whole.
Yeah.
I saw it as a unit, and I had grown up with Romans as a string of proof texts
Right.
of how you get
The Romans
saved.
Road.
Right.
Yeah.
That was my introduction to Romans. But when you see it as a whole, and if and you slow down, you catch this passion, this fiery passion that Paul has for something that's
Yes.
more than people getting saved. It's more.
Yeah.
It's more.
I could see that.
Not that Paul didn't care about that. More about it was more than a concern for individuals getting saved. For Paul, what I saw was this was God's work on the grandest scale.
Uh-huh.
This was about all of humanity for Paul.
Yeah.
And what was distressing to him was that his fellow Jewish Christians were not passionately clinging to that. It seemed, I think he felt like he was all alone in this commitment.
Do you also, I totally agree with that. I think I also pick up, Paul is also distressed about non-Jewish Christians who think that they've superseded
Right. The non-Jew, the non-Jews see the Jewish Christians
as like an old-fashioned a thing
superstitious.
that doesn't matter anymore.
Right, yeah,
that, like they lost their chance.
Right.
And I think
Yeah,
Paul
he fights both.
is writing like to both of these communities, or like I think distressed by both of these perspectives,
Yeah,
which seem to have been really
he
prominent in the
he
early
addresses
church.
the failings of the natural branches. He addresses the failings of the wild branches, right?
Yeah.
And both sets of branches, you got your problems.
Yeah.
But the real problem is all you branches don't realize you're part
You're
of the
part
same
of the same
tree.
tree.
That's the whole thing. It's look at what you're supposed to be rooted in, and it's this grand vision of salvation for the world.
Yeah.
It's not a religion, it's the redemption of creation for Paul. This is salvation on the cosmic scale. And if you get locked up in your own little world, your own little house church, your own little field of view,
Yeah. It would be easy to think of this movement as something much smaller, more like parochial than it was supposed to be.
Isn't that the problem we've faced today? I mean,
Yeah.
I have. This will sound horrible, but I have very little patience for the church these days. At least the church that I've experienced, because it feels so damn parochial. It's like, let's get our heads out of our behinds and let's like try to imagine what big things God might want to do in this world. What, I mean, what issues, what Paul cared about justice, for example. Um, he cared about a reconciliation, of groups of people.
Yeah.
And look at the kinds of issues we're facing today.
And maybe one of the things I like about the 16th chapter is like the 15 chapters before then have been prophetic and fiery and Paul is like, he's not calling people out, but he's clearly calling out some trends, some like intellectual trends in the church, or some patterns in the church that he thinks are unhealthy. But then in this last chapter, you have like the pastoral, like he still loves those churches and the people in those churches, who I assume are some of the people. I might be wrong about this. Maybe this is wrong. But you have to assume some of the people he names in this chapter have gotten it wrong or are doing it wrong. Like, if these are the leaders of the churches in Rome, and if he's writing this letter to correct the errors that he sees in churches all over the place, not just in Rome, you have to assume, like, he thinks some of these people are doing it wrong, but he still addresses them as collaborators and co-workers and friends, and expresses, like, explicitly says, like, these are people I love, these are followers of Jesus, these are people who are being as true to the gospel as they can. There's something about that.
It's like, so this is his longest letter. It's not a church he started, so he writes his longest letter to a church he didn't start, which that says something. Like, okay, you're going to spend more energy, more time on this and you've had concerns about these other churches you started. There's got to be a reason why he's so fixated on addressing this congregation this way. I'm guessing, I mean, it's hard to know, but if he's a smart guy, and I think he was, he must realize whatever's going on in Rome with the Christian movement is significant, because that's the center of the known world, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
And that if his vision of what God's doing can take full form there in Rome, I think he sees that as, like, that would be incredible, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think you're probably right.
And and then also think about what the urban world was like. Or what's a city like today? Well, if you go to rural parts of our country, they are very uniform, culturally uniform. You don't see a lot of diversity. You get large cities, and they become these collections of, they look like the world in miniature.
Yeah.
And
it's like a landscape or an environment in which the Christian experiment is going to be really tested.
So Rome, the political reality, and the citizens and the people, non-citizens, and everybody that lived in Rome, that if that's what the kingdom of God should look like in Paul's mind, I think.
It's like, the question is, if it can work in Rome, it can work anywhere. But maybe also the sense that a city like that, an environment like that, is the only place where a Christian community can really be all that it is supposed to be. Because, like you said, in a more homogenous community, it's just not, there's not the opportunity to ignore those boundaries or social barriers, or barriers of class or ethnicity. So you do get the sense that, like, this context is interesting to Paul because of the opportunity it represents to test his theology, what he thinks this community should be or could be.
So as far as Romans goes, and then what this list
We've got
addresses, huh?
we've got to introduce this.
Oh,
We've got to go back and
Okay.
say like, I think we hit the ground running, which is great. But I'm not sure we've actually explained, what we're talking about.
Okay.
So Romans, we've been talking about Paul's letter to the Romans, and maybe what I'm thinking is we just haven't offered much context at all about what this letter is. We've shared a lot of details,
Yeah.
but not like the more basic context of like what this book is, who wrote it. I think we've talked about why. But like where it fits within Paul's biography, and what we think is going on when Paul wrote that. We've kind of addressed like what the church was like in Rome, but I think we know at least a little bit that might be helpful context for our listeners. So if you had to do like an elevator pitch, like a 90-second summary of the book of Romans, how would you describe it to somebody who'd never read it? So it's a letter.
Yeah.
But probably not. We've talked about Paul's letters before, but we're not talking about like a letter that was sent from Paul to his friend in Rome. Like this is almost certainly an epistle that was meant to be read in public and wasn't sent just to one individual person or even one individual community, but is sent like literally to all the Christians in Rome. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's as I mentioned, one commentator identified that some of these were probably leaders of different house churches.
Yeah.
Some of the people named.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then maybe the slave or Urbanus or Bonus, however you pronounce it, maybe he was part of a congregation that was mostly former slaves, right? Or
current slaves? Is that possible?
yeah, I guess. Yeah, I
I
mean,
think we know that was
a lot of
kind
these,
of possible.
A lot
right?
of these are pretty sure also worked with were slaves or servants for the emperor. You know,
Yeah.
the emperor's household.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's like, you know, the butler at the White House. You know,
Yeah.
whatever. Greet, you know, whoever that is, or the chef at the White House. You know, it's an odd collection of people. And so what I'm wondering is, why did Paul write a letter? What drove him to write this letter to these people?
He's raising funds. So what scholars do think is, so Paul is not in Rome and has never been to Rome, as far as we know, when this letter's being written.
Right.
I think maybe it was written in Corinth. Is that right?
I don't
Do you
remember where.
I can't remember either. I think it might be Corinth. People think Paul was traveling around.
Well,
He's a
was it
missionary.
Phoebe at Corinth?
It's the name of,
Because she's the one that brings the letter.
right.
So,
Yeah. And his
yeah, she's from Corinth.
amanuensis as well, I think, is associated with Corinth as well, Tertius. So Paul is this Christian missionary. He spends most of his life traveling around, founding churches, teaching in churches, like visiting churches that other people have founded and teaching them more. Like this is a thing that happened in the early church, and Paul is the most prominent of the early missionaries, at least as far as we know. And this letter, we think, was written kind of as an introduction from Paul to the churches in Rome. So he's planning to visit Rome and sends this letter to introduce himself, to kind of give them some sense of his teaching and what he believes the gospel of Jesus Christ really is, and to offer some teaching for the church because of what he's heard is going on there. Like he's addressing, we think addressing issues that are live or that the church in Rome is wrestling with. I think we already said it, but when we say the church in Rome, we're not talking about a really organized.
There would not have
It's
been
not
a
one
building.
church. Yeah, they wouldn't have had a building or a church building. So we're not talking about architecture. We're not talking about a denomination or anything like where all the churches were rigidly connected in a hierarchy and there was one person who was in charge of all of them or leading all of them. We're almost certainly talking about autonomous cells, which had sprung up over the last 30 years, kind of as the Christian movement begins to pick up steam. So you had a large Jewish population in Rome. So certainly some of these Christians were probably converts or Jewish people who had accepted the message of Jesus and were thinking of themselves as followers of Jesus. Some of them would have certainly been Gentiles. Some of these churches would have included people who had no historic religious connection to Judaism, but had heard the message of Jesus and become Christians. And we have no idea, really, how interconnected they were. But Paul is writing this letter, which will somehow be passed around between these churches and probably copied so that they can all read it. And hopefully then when Paul travels to Rome, he'll actually meet them and teach in their churches. And
Well,
spend time
and
with
if
them.
they weren't well interconnected, one thing is clear: Paul thought they ought to be.
Yeah.
Hey, you group of people in this house church, connected to this name,
Yeah.
and have you read my letter here at the end? I'm going to call you out. Do y'all realize I'm asking you to like live this reality out?
And maybe they were connected. There's no way to know. Like at this point,
Yeah, we don't know how big the Christian community was in
we have
Rome.
no idea how many people it is, how long they've been there, but you get the sense of a fairly established community. So probably people who probably were spending time together or at least knew of each other, but there's just no way to know.
Well, it's certainly there's significant success growth within the Gentile population in Rome. And we know that that Judaism had a kind of had religious protection.
Yep.
That's one of the, I think, sub themes that I think he's sensing that if Judaism and Christianity split off, I think he sees that as that's a failure of the gospel. And so I think he senses that there is this tension.
Yeah.
From the beginning, really. I mean, you see it in Acts of Jews and Gentiles struggling with how to be in faith together because there is such a cultural difference. It is hard to be with people who aren't like you. But yet that's the vision for Paul.
Yeah. You mentioned the kind of the privileged status that Jewish people had in the Roman Empire, which was not privileged status. Is probably not.
They were
exempted. Is probably putting it too strongly.
They were exempted from emperor worship.
Yeah, essentially, everyone else had to worship the pagan gods, worship the emperor. Over the course of like decades, centuries, Jewish people had said like, we can't do this. Like theologically, we're not allowed to do this. And it's one of the only examples we know in the Roman Empire where a religious exception like that was made, where the laws said like, okay, Jewish people are, we'd rather have them here as citizens not rebelling against us. They don't have to worship the emperor, which I really do think was born out of violence, right? It's because Jewish communities had died and killed over this issue in places around the Roman Empire. And so eventually, at this point, there is kind of a stability, a status where Jewish people are free to practice their own religion. But that special status had kind of depended on not proselytizing. Like it was fine because they weren't trying to convert anybody else.
Right.
And so one of the tensions, or one of the sources of that tension, even though the New Testament doesn't really name this, we know that Jewish people were probably concerned about losing this status that they'd fought pretty hard to maintain. And Roman officials were probably saying, like, okay, this was not the deal. Like, now Christian missionaries are proselytizing to everybody and trying to convert everybody into this new movement. And they're saying, like, this, you can't, social stability will not allow you to mess everything up or rock the boat this much.
But Paul very much wanted to rock the boat.
Yeah.
Because he thought God destroyed the powers and principalities, that he trumped these political realities, these social, ethnic, national realities, that God's promise to Abraham was bigger than the Roman Empire.
Yeah. Which are not things Rome wanted to hear.
Right.
So when this letter is written, we think Paul is planning a missionary journey where Rome will just be a layover. So like he's planning, Paul thinks, or some scholars have speculated, that Paul thinks his work in the Mediterranean is done. Like he's planted all the seeds he needs to plant. There are churches in all these different cities. And Paul is ready to move on even further out into the world. So Paul is actually planning a missionary journey to Spain, which is a long way from anywhere Paul's been before. And Rome would be a stop on the journey. So
just think of how crazy that is.
It's insane.
It's so hard. It's so hard to put yourself in that ancient world, ancient transportation.
Like, if you go to Spain, you're never coming back. He has to know that. Like, and I don't think he's planning to. He's just going to keep going.
Yeah. If he found out there was a Greenland, he would head there too.
Yeah.
But for him, that's what the kingdom of God was. It was this
ever expanding thing. Like,
and it wasn't a political thing for Paul. I mean,
I think I know what you mean.
No, I mean, this is not a national or a political movement designed by human beings.
And it doesn't seem like he feels some ownership over these churches he started, but he's not thinking of, this is not his little empire. Like, he's planting seeds. He really seems to think he's planting seeds. He's trying to be helpful and support these communities, but they've got to do it on their own. Like, he's going to try to set them in the right direction, and then he's off to plant more seeds somewhere else. So like you can imagine a missionary like just doing an endless circuit of these churches he founded to say, like, no, this is our brand. This is how we do it. And it should be the same in all these churches. But Paul does not seem interested in that. Yeah. He doesn't make it. Maybe that's the last thing to mention. Paul does make it to Rome, but he doesn't go as a free man. What we
Very
know,
far west.
Yes, what we know from the Book of Acts is he is arrested, ends up like moving through a court process, and is eventually transported to Rome as a prisoner, where he lives under house arrest. We think which letter is Philippians written? We think from house arrest in Rome, but probably because of these things we've been talking about, Paul's approach to his Jewish faith and Paul's practice of proselytizing and Paul's sense that the Roman Empire was not the be-all, end-all of the universe. ends up with Paul executed in Rome after living there under house arrest, and never makes this missionary journey that he had planned to Spain.
But here's an interesting thought. His whole strategy, his way of doing, was I think he had a sense, I'm not going to be here to keep track of you all. I think he had a sense that, he had a limited time.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't, and he did want to let these things evolve, these churches evolve naturally,
Yeah. No sense that he would be there to shepherd these churches over the long haul, or that was his job.
But the one thing he was uncompromising on was the grand nature of what God has done in Christ.
Yeah, he would.
It's huge.
He
in
felt
his mind.
some sense of order. Like he got pretty angry when other leaders contradicted him or taught things that were contrary to exactly that grand movement that he understood, or that he believed that whatever God was doing, it was for everyone. It was a universal mission, universal project, and anybody who tried to narrow that down or exclude people from it, Paul would at least write back to a community he'd founded.
It'd be interesting. I don't remember the exact number. I'm thinking it's 20,000. It could be 40, but the number of distinct Christian groups in the world
today.
Oh
yeah, that's a lot.
I know there's over 50 some different kinds of Baptists, for example. And I think if Paul saw that reality, he would be pissed. He's like,
do you think he'd be surprised?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe he sensed that that's just the human way, and that he was so frustrated that he couldn't shake.
He's like, I'm just going to go to Spain.
I can't shake people out of this parochial, insular way of being in the world. Maybe it's impossible to have a cosmopolitan version of the church.
He doesn't sound cynical, at least in this letter. Or even in the later ones.
Maybe he was too stubborn to be cynical.
Could be. Yeah. It's one of those things I would really like to know.
Did
did Paul think of himself as fighting a losing battle? Or was Paul a true believer that these communities would flourish the way he knew they could?
I think he believed that.
Yeah. He at least said it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There is some... one of the motivations for writing this letter probably was to network and to make connections in Rome, knowing that he would need funding for this missionary journey. I joked that it was just a fundraising letter, which I think is too cynical, but there is kind of a practical sense. Paul needed support.
Well, he wasn't hesitant to ask for money.
So he gestures toward that, like he in this letter he kind of suggests what his plans are, and that he'll need support from the Christians in Rome to do it.
Well, and Phoebe was likely a patron, right? Probably very wealthy, and so if he's sending one of his patrons to carry the letter,
which is what this chapter says. So it starts off with this idea that Paul commends Phoebe to the Christians in Rome, like she's the messenger, she's carrying the letter.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember the word that's used in Greek in that very second verse. I think here the New Revised, it calls her a benefactor, but the Greek word is prostatus.
Oh yeah,
but it's more like patron. It implies great influence, like a patron of the arts, or somebody of significant means who has substantial influence. That's what that word is.
And she's a deacon.
Right. Yeah.
Real one, not even a
Well,
deaconess.
no, she was a deaconess.
Definitely doesn't say that.
Right. But yeah, so clearly if you're sending somebody like that to Rome, it wouldn't, she's going to be twisting arms.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, there's still more we can talk about, but let's take a break and then we'll come back.
Yeah. Sounds good.
We're back.
Yes.
And we've talked about a lot of this, but I think there's still more that we can talk about. Take it or leave it? Is this a take it or a leave it for you?
That's actually kind of a hard question for me, because chapter 16, it's not a standalone chapter.
Like, it's not really necessary.
Yeah, but I'm going to keep it because I think it does, if you take seriously who these people are in this list of names, and you take seriously where each of these people are located within society, and even in within the religious realm as well. It is an interpretive key, I think, to the whole of Romans.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This is a take it for me. Like I think I said, I think this, you could make a case that this is the most interesting chapter in the book and essential context to understand what, not what Paul's talking about, but why it matters to Paul. And there's nothing here that offends me. I love the warmth that comes through as Paul is listing these names and talking about his relationship to these people. And yeah, I would keep this.
So here's my question for you. Out of all these people listed, is there anybody that you would really like to meet?
Oh, that's a good question. I would like to know Prisca and Aquila. I think I want to know the story about verse 4. They risked their necks for Paul's life. Would love to know that story. I'm really interested in Andronicus and Junia, who are prominent among the apostles.
That's my first. I would want to have a sit down with them.
Really would love to figure out what that means. So let's unpack the word apostle. Like how do you understand that word now? And has your understanding of the word apostle changed over time? What is an apostle?
So I think for Paul, an apostle, this is so hard to answer, but I think an apostle would be somebody who was set aside by either Jesus during his earthly pre-crucifixion ministry or his post-resurrection appearances. It had to be somebody that had an encounter with either the historical Jesus or the risen Jesus. And Paul considered him.
Paul suggests
don't quite fit the category.
One untimely born.
You're right. Yeah. I sort of encountered him, but
in a dream.
Yeah. So I do that's the way he tended to use it. So I'm guessing that these people would have fallen into the category of the earliest of Christians.
Yeah.
And identified leaders within the earliest of Christians.
I was like taught. I remember being taught, probably as a teenager, in some church or the other, that an apostle is someone who knew Jesus in the flesh or embodied. Again, Paul is like a special case, because supposedly Paul was commissioned by Jesus in a bodily form even after Jesus had died and been resurrected and ascended and all of that. But that was like the first definition I ever heard. An apostle is someone who was directly commissioned by Jesus But there are places in the New Testament that use, Paul seems to use the word that way, but there are writings in the New Testament that use it slightly differently. I'm thinking of, is it Ephesians, where the list
Some
of
are called to be
offices,
apostles,
right,
prophets. Yeah.
where it feels more like just a slightly more generic role within the church.
Mm-hmm.
Like the word literally means somebody who's sent.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of like a missionary vocation,
Commissioned. Yeah.
would be an apostle, could be anybody who was sent by anyone, to do a job
But
or to
I'll tell
share
you
a
one thing,
message.
though, regardless of how you define, what your parameters are for what an apostle is, to say that there was a woman who was one
Yeah, prominent.
prominent
Yeah,
would have been a huge problem in my church. So I never encountered Junia
uh-huh,
actually until seminary, and I took a class on that we focused on this whole issue of women in the Bible,
uh-huh.
and so the interesting thing is, why is it that instead of reading this and saying, "Oh, there was a woman, Junia, who was a prominent apostle," instead the church reacts by saying, "We got to turn her back into a man. We got to do, we got."
Or suggest that it doesn't. One of the arguments I've heard. So the word apostle in the New Testament is almost always used to describe a role, a formal role
Mm-hmm.
within the church. And of course, there are people, even in the New Testament and still to today, there are people who want to limit like the formal roles that women can play in churches and say that women can't lead, can't teach, can't do all these things. So there's always been like this, for years at least, there's been this compulsion to ignore, to deny. Like I've heard the argument that it doesn't actually say Junia is an apostle. It says she's prominent among the apostles. So maybe the husband is an apostle and Junia is just like they're always together. So they're both prominent among the apostles,
Mm-hmm.
even though she obviously couldn't be an apostle. Of course, the more plain reading of the sentence is that they're both apostles,
Mm-hmm.
and especially prominent ones. At that.
If you read it in Greek grammar, Greek grammar is pretty precise, and that means they're of the grouping of.
Yeah.
They are in the group of apostles.
Yeah.
It's a specific. Yeah. It's not it's not fuzzy. But yeah, it's just interesting. So what's in a name? Well, here we have a female name identified prominent among the apostles, yet why is there this tendency to just want to not even think about that possibility? No,
Yeah.
can't be a woman. Instead of, well, if it's a woman.
And Greek is, again, pretty precise.
Oh,
like
yeah,
it's
cannot,
a language that carries grammatical gender.
Right. And there's in all of our knowledge of Greek names in classical Greek, there is no man named Junia.
Yeah.
There isn't. It's not a man's name.
Yeah. And it's a common
It's
name
not like
for a
Pat that can go either way. It's, it's,
a lot of the names here are women,
Mhm.
right? Like there's women feature really prominently in this list, both among like the formal leaders of churches and just the people. Paul thought it was important to greet.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way that the New Revised Standard Version talks about Phoebe is, I like the way they say it. Help her in whatever she may require from you.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if in the church I grew up in, the whole idea of women, in ministry, to say, do what this woman tells you to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's clearly labeled as a deacon. Again, another role in contemporary churches today that is often restricted to male leadership. But clearly, we have here in the Bible a woman who is labeled as a deacon. It's just another thing
clearly
people
this
have to ignore.
list, nationality, ethnic group, religious background, those things don't seem to matter to Paul.
Yeah.
They don't count for anything really. What counts?
Hospitality, support, faithfulness,
Love.
those things.
Yeah.
I do love in the first or maybe the second verse, whatever she may require from you, welcome her. Like he's commending this person to the hospitality of a group of people he's never met, which I don't think is unique to ancient Christians, but is again just another window into the ancient world. Like you don't have hotels. Even a wealthy person traveling is going to be dependent on the hospitality she receives when she arrives in Rome. And Paul and Phoebe apparently trust that when she gets there, somebody is going to give her a place to stay and provide what she needs while she's visiting. I think we mentioned it, but we have the name Herodian, and scholars have kind of assumed, almost have to assume, that this is somebody who is connected to the
Agrippa.
Yeah, the king, right, the ruling family in first century Israel. So the Jewish king Herod. Is kind of like he's a Roman puppet, so he's not an autonomous kingdom, but he's the ruler. He's a villain in some of the biblical stories. But here you have somebody associated with that name who's greeted 30 years later as part of a prominent member of the Christian community.
Just one thing when I look at this list, I just think, we know so little really about what the church was like.
Yeah,
we don't really have a clue.
All just guesses. Yeah.
You think it's the limited material we have that we call the New Testament. I don't think we can even begin to paint a picture what life was like for early Christians, really.
Yeah. And that's one of the lingering questions I have as I read a passage like this. Like we have this suggestion that Phoebe is a woman of means, somebody of significance in her community and maybe even in Rome. We have like these kind of these names that suggest connections to imperial power or royalty. So there's this idea that like Paul is writing to it's not totally clear, but you could get the sense that Paul is writing to the prominent members of the community. Excuse me. And what I really want to know is like, what about the totally ordinary people? What about the names Paul doesn't know? Like, I want to know what being a Christian meant to them, what their practice was like, because you have to assume, like, this isn't all the Christians in Rome. Surely this is just a very few prominent leaders, whatever class they came from or background that they had. And like you said, there is just absolutely no way to know, but everything we have tells us just a tiny bit about the most prominent Christians from the first century, and we know absolutely nothing about the ordinary
Here's a question
people.
that just popped into my head. I wonder if just a straight Gentile Christian, no Jewish background at all, okay? I wonder if they felt that their faith as a Gentile had a connection to Judaism.
That's an interesting question. What would the connection be?
Well, that it just popped into my head, so I don't have an answer to my question. But I mean, did they? I wonder if they saw it as part of a continuum or something brand new.
Yeah.
If they felt that they were in some way connected to
Yeah, like
Ju-
did they think of themselves just as Christians, full stop, or as part
Derivative of
of
Judaism
the
somehow.
Jewish community?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't, at least in the evangelical world, I don't think we see a truly deep connection to
Yeah.
Judaism. Truly.
Yeah.
If you go
I
to
am
a Jewish
so
Sabbath service, though, you see them you see the practices of the typical Sabbath service. Like, wow, we do a lot of that
yeah,
stuff
this
too.
is a thing we do that we thought we invented. Yeah. I am I just cannot imagine, like, temperamentally, I cannot imagine being a, G- a Gentile person, not having no connection to this community, and then hearing like a Christian preacher in the first century and thinking, oh yeah, that's I'm gonna convert. Like I'm gonna
Hmm.
take this. It's a risk. Like
Hmm.
persecution might not have been common, but it wasn't unheard of. Like um you were I
Well, and it's not a
who does
mainstream
that?
movement.
Why?
That's the
Yeah.
other thing. I mean, it's going to be viewed with suspicion. Any new
Yeah,
religious movement.
you're doing something weird.
Hmm.
And I just like fundamentally, temperamentally, I cannot imagine like what kind of person does that. And then you get 20 of them in a room,
Hmm.
all like hanging out. I don't know what's the
Oh,
energy of that gathering like.
it would be. Here's another question that I was thinking of is if we could like reproduce a similar list with the kind of diversity of this list. We could go around Indiana, Indianapolis, and like pick people that would
Uh huh.
approximate the variety of people here, put them all together. So I can imagine you have a room full of people. You've got some black Christians, white Christians. You've got, a couple of professors from some universities that are there, and you've got somebody from the
The mayor's
governor,
office. Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
governor's, and then you've got some people from out, in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. Maybe somebody from Gary, but you just as many different kinds of people, put them all together,
Uh huh.
and then say, hey, we're all part of the same thing. Let's talk about that. I, I wonder what that would be like. Because,
I wouldn't want to be there.
Mhm.
I don't think.
But that's what he's
Yeah.
doing, I think, in a
Yeah,
way.
I
It's
think
this,
you're right.
It's this collection of people that are so different, really, by their names. By these names, you could tell these people are so different. A lot of these people have nothing in common,
Yeah.
really.
And I think that's the scary thing about being in that hypothetical room is like I think it's scary to um you're going to my fear is that you're going to find, oh, we don't have anything in common. Like we thought we did, but when we say we're Christians, we mean completely different things. And there's actually not much here that we can talk about, not much here that we share.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And if you want to take seriously a list of names and its implication for us, I mean,
Uh-huh.
as a retired pastor, if I was in active ministry, I would say, are we going to take this stuff seriously or not? We should do that kind of an experiment, you know.
Yeah, why don't I want to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you don't,
I don't think
if
I
you don't
have
even do
this.
the thought experiment, if you're not even willing to do the thought
Oh,
experiment,
I'll think about it. I'll do the thought experiment. Yeah.
But
I'll sign up for that part of this project.
I think
Yeah.
it makes me sad at how narrow the focus of really probably most Christians, no matter what part of the Christian world you're a part of, we don't see ourselves as deeply connected to the other Christians who are different from us.
Yeah. And I'm not sure. I think maybe it's a problem. I don't think I start with the same assumption that Paul does, which is, and maybe in the first century he was right about this, but But I think the landscape today, like 21st century Indiana, the truth is, even people who call themselves Christians are practicing distinct religions. Like, I'm, even though we use the same words and have some rituals in common, like this faith means something complete. I have more in common with people who aren't Christians and don't profess any faith, or who profess a different faith, than I do with lots of people who profess Christianity. And I think I assume that going into a room like that. Like, the fact that we call ourselves Christians doesn't mean nearly as much to me as the way people live, or the way people talk about God. And I'm not sure that's, I mean, I might think that's a problem, but I don't think it's a problem that can be, maybe it's just a problem I'm cynical about solving. I don't know. I would be excited to be in that room if you removed Christianity from the equation. Like, if it was just a room of those people and they didn't all call themselves Christians, like, I would be excited to get that diverse group of people together and say, okay, what do we have in common? We're not going to assume that Jesus is the thing. Did that make any sense?
It did to me, but I think I was tracking with you. How do I want, so in this imagined room full of all these different Christians from Indiana, how do you, like, give me a sample interaction that you could imagine between two really different people in that room?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can thought experiment that fast.
Okay.
I think so this happens sometimes. Like, I meet somebody, I'm a pastor, so like, I meet somebody and they find out I'm a pastor, or they know I'm a pastor, and they tell me, oh, I go to church too. I'm part of this church. And they assume I believe all the same things they believe, about how people should behave, about like what you have to believe or what it means. And they don't even think to like ask the question. Like, there's no frame of reference. Like, there's just this assumption that as Christians we all think the same thing, and we don't. So I think that's the interaction. I assume it's people talking past each other. It's saying the same words and meaning totally different things.
By listing these people, Paul's sort of forcing them to do this, though, isn't he?
At least suggesting that they should, or that they should acknowledge each other. But Paul also, one of the other hints in Romans, it's something I think is really interesting. And maybe you already, I can't remember if you said this on mic or not, but Paul has this great line about, like, the pagans are better people than you. Like, they're doing a better job of all the things God wants us to do. And they don't know it. Like, they
don't even know
they're not
God.
thinking about God the way you are. They don't even know the name Jesus. And I think that's a really suggestive idea, that for Paul, like, these are the Christians, but this is not the only community that matters. They happen to be embedded in a world, in a community, in a society that God loves, and in which God is moving in ways they couldn't have expected.
Yeah, I don't. So I'm wanting to say, I'll just say it. So I came to the conclusion that Paul was actually a universalist at one point along, and kind of cling to that still. But what's interesting is, if you say that, when I've identified myself as that with somebody who doesn't think that way, it's always been interesting that to say that comes across as this profound heresy, to say you're a universalist.
Yeah.
And I always,
for some people,
I wonder why. Why is it offensive to to some to think that the circle is much bigger than we imagine.
Yeah. If I knew the answer to
Yeah,
why.
if Paul is drawing this huge wide circle and he's making them look at each other, you people that work for the emperor and you related to King Herod and you slaves and you whatever, like
Eventually you're going to have to figure out how to get along.
right. Well, and then
because you're going to be together forever.
He makes it plain in verse 17. I urge you, brothers and sisters, to keep an eye on those who create dissensions and hindrances in opposition to the teachings you have learned. Avoid them.
Yeah.
For such people do not
things.
serve our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah. It's very clear. And it's where Paul ends the letter. It's one of my favorite things. One of the last things I wanted to make sure we talked about.
Dissension. What is that? It's
any dividing, any
right?
splitting off into our own little groups.
Yeah.
Or
and
forcing
that's what he's
people
fighting against. But our natural inclination is to split.
Yeah.
Over little things, even.
I don't know. It's a good question. Was Paul a universalist? I do think, without a doubt, Paul's vision of what God is doing is universal in scope. It's for everyone. I cannot get a sense, and I think maybe I've even talked about this. I don't know what Paul thought was going to happen at the culmination of all things. When God finishes this work that's done, is everybody going to be saved out of the
Romans.
world?
God has consigned everyone, Jew and Gentile, to disobedience, so that in the end he may have mercy on them all.
Yeah.
And even in Romans 4 or 5, just as one man's sin led to death for all, how much more will the act of Christ lead to life for everyone? Right.
So, but Paul never says so Paul expected the resurrection of the dead. Paul writes about new bodies, but Paul doesn't seem to think about heaven and hell the way most 21st century Christians do. So I don't know what Paul expected, the next phase of history to be. Would it just be paradise for everyone, or would there be a moment of choice and decision and judgment? And would it be possible to stay on the wrong side?
Yeah.
I don't think we can know based on what we have from Paul.
So I would say, let me alter my perspective a little bit then, or the way I phrase it. For Paul, the gospel had universal implications.
Yeah.
That even doesn't work.
I think that's definitely
it's
true.
The reconciling of humanity to itself, in a sense. It's helping humanity be humanity. That God, to be what God created humanity to be.
Yeah.
And we have to be humanity together.
Yeah.
You can't have little pockets of humanity that don't recognize each other.
Or you shouldn't. But you can. We've proved that.
And
over and over.
Part of what God did in Christ is to attack those structures that keep us at odds with each other.
To make it possible for people to be reconciled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we continue dividing. At least some people continue dividing.
And so that's not a way I ever thought about salvation. I never thought about salvation as having these incredible sociological, national, world level effects.
Yeah.
It was always about me and my soul and whether I went to heaven or not.
Yeah. I think Paul is so much more interesting and a much more dynamic thinker, a much more confusing and mysterious thinker than most that most preachers of all kinds ever give him credit for. He's a really compelling writer, even if it's sometimes confusing and unclear. Anything else here that we need to talk about? I think we've covered a lot of it.
I like the fact that Tertius gets a little bit in there at the end.
Yes, it's not like the most exciting thing
That's cool
for most people, but I love this, which is confusing for some people. So the line in verse 22 is, "I, Tertius, the writer of this letter, greet you in the Lord." And the question that is immediately raised is, wait, I thought Paul was writing this letter. But it's is it amanuensis?
His secretary.
His secretary. So Paul would have dictated these letters to someone else who actually wrote them down. And here you get the shout out.
Which letter is it where Paul says,
I'm writing with my own hand?
This part here.
It's Galatians, right?
Is it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
You know it's important because...
And he says, I have to write with large letters.
Yeah.
But why? Because he probably couldn't see very well. But still, I think it's cool that Tertius, his secretary, gets a word in. Hey, hey, everybody.
Yeah.
Smiley
I'm
face.
saying hi, too. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what his emoji would be right there.
Yeah. And I like the Paul's kind of last exhortations. We've mentioned them already. Don't to avoid division and those things. But I like Paul's wrap up, which is fairly generic, but it's a word of encouragement and hope.
Again, though, look at the 26 here. I think this gets to this big picture that Paul has. Well, he talks about the mystery that was kept secret for long ages. That's the end of 25. But is now disclosed and through the prophetic writings is made known to all the Gentiles according to the command of the eternal God to bring about the obedience of faith. Yeah. It's to all the Gentiles.
Yeah.
That's a big concept.
It is. Yeah, Paul absolutely thinks something new and exciting has been disclosed and is now clear that was mysterious for ages. I think the mystery is God really just going to save a few people? Does God not love everything that God created? And Paul spends most of his life thinking, this is an exclusive thing. Or spends some of his life thinking God's love is just for a few people. And then
I'm saved.
It changes his life to realize, no, this is for everybody. It's a cool idea. Any final thoughts? Anything else we need to talk about? It's good to be back. We were on a longer hiatus than we expected. I was doing some backpacking in July. So it's been over a month since we recorded. We were hoping to start recording a couple weeks ago, but then we had one thing after another, and the roof over our recording studio was being torn off, so we were delayed an extra week. But it's good to be back. It's fun to record again.
Yes. I would like to say we haven't made any plans for specifically what we're going to be doing, but I have a particular interest down the road of looking at this idea of violence, religious, sacred violence. I think that's a question a lot of, I guess, skeptics might have about the faith, Christian faith. And that's something I hope we can spend some time looking at. And I would be just curious to know for people out there who have listened, if they have thoughts or questions about violence in the Bible.
Does it trouble them? Do they notice it?
Is God violent?
Yeah.
Does God commit any acts of violence or not?
Well, the God of peace will shortly crush Satan under the feet of the Christians in Rome, which is an interesting little phrase that Paul uses here. It doesn't sound like something the God of peace would do.
Right.
But I guess Satan deserves it. So, we're excited. So we've got, I think, a couple weeks left in this miniseries on some biblical names. And then we've got some exciting plans for after that. So hopefully Episodes will be coming out weekly, at least for the foreseeable future, and we're glad to be back. We want to say thank you to our producer, Nick Mandog Smith, and our executive producer, Jay Kennedy. Thank you to all of you for listening and joining us today. If you have questions that you'd like for us to respond to or suggestions for future episodes, you can send them to unholyBibleStudyPodcast@gmail.com. Scott, any final thoughts?
No, learn some more names.
Yeah. Next week, we are continuing this mini-series on names. I think we've got a passage from Acts. The change of Paul's name is the next thing we're going to be talking about as we move toward the conclusion of this mini-series. For now, we're going to keep talking about this, but you don't have to keep listening.